Hello, and welcome to the Food Storage Guys podcast. I'm Jim Brewster.
And I'm Dan Baldwin.
Together, we're the Food Storage Guys. Today, we're going to discuss making bread from scratch. Dan, what do you need to make bread? Can you tell me what tools are required?
Sure, Jim. So you need some way to grind the grain, preferably wheat, as that has a lot of gluten in it and makes great bread. If you use other grains, it may get too heavy and not turn out very well. So you need a nice hand crank grain mill, and that'll allow you to grind grain whether or not you have electricity or not. And you need a large bowl in order to mix the bread up into. And if you want, you can knead it right in the bowl if it's big enough, or you can knead it on the counter. You need a good heavy-duty spoon, a metal spoon, or a good strong wooden spoon works fine. And you need a bread pan in order to bake a loaf. If you don't have one, you could always just do it kind of a round lump on a flat surface, such as a cookie sheet, but a bread loaf would be preferable. And then you need some way to bake it, an oven of some type. So a conventional gas or electric oven is great, very convenient, so you can set the temperature and all that. But if you are without electricity or gas and you need some way to still cook it, a Dutch oven would be another option, which is basically a big cast iron pot with a lid that you can put inside of a wood stove or set it on top, or you could do it on a campfire. And so if you need a wood stove, that's not something you want up all the time, but collapsible. We actually have a series of several different stoves that are burn firewood. We even have one that's called a Tundra Takedown that collapses down to about 4 inches high and about a foot wide, but about 2 feet long. Little box that you can slide underneath the bed or put in a closet. That's very convenient for just emergency use.
So you'd need a Dutch oven, right? Do we sell a Dutch oven, Dan?
Yeah, we actually do have a Dutch oven. It's a nice 6-quart one, and it would allow you to put your bread in that with some maybe parchment paper inside to keep it from sticking too much. And then you can set it out on a campfire and put some coals on the top, on the lid. Which is how the pioneers used to do it.
So do we sell a grain mill, Dan?
Yeah, we have this hand crank grain mill for grain, seeds, and beans available on our website. It's a nice cast metal grain mill. It's all one piece, and it has stones in there for grinding the grain, which give it a nice fine flour, a lot finer than you'd get with a steel burr mill. And it's infinitely adjustable too, so you can decide how fine you want it. It also has some stainless steel burrs that also do for oily seeds, so you can make your own peanut butter or grind little grains and seeds.
Now, does that have any options besides the hand crank?
Yeah, so if you don't, your arm get tired and you do have access to something like a electric drill, battery-powered one, for instance, you could take the handle off, and you can use a little socket to attach to the back end of the shaft there, and you can just run the drill and grind your grain that way.
That sounds like it'd save a little bit of elbow grease.
Yeah, it certainly does, and it speeds up the process significantly.
So, Dan, that's really interesting. Can you give me a list now of the ingredients that we would need to bake a loaf of bread?
Sure. So the basic ingredients that you need water, flour, yeast, some sugar source, and a little bit of salt. So those are kind of like the basic ingredients.
So those are the basics. How about for any kind of specialty bread?
Well, you could add things to your bread, such as like oats or something like rolled oats, or you could put in some raisins, small berries, things like that, to make it a little more special. Or you could make it more of a savory bread by putting some herbs or garlic and onions in there, onion powder, things like that. You can mix in with the bread to make it a little bit different.
How about banana bread?
Yeah, you could make banana bread.
So, all right, we know the tools, we know the ingredients. Can you give me a step-by-step breakdown of how you go about making a loaf of bread?
Sure, Jim. So first of all, you want to get your bowl out, and then you want to go ahead and put in 2 cups of hot water. So this will be about a 2.5-pound loaf, and this would just be a recipe for 1 loaf. And so that hot water needs to be about 95 to 100 degrees. And so as hot as it'll come out of your faucet is probably a good temperature. And you don't want it to get the temperature above 110, as that will kill the yeast. So that's just something to keep in mind. A little thermometer, a probe thermometer for your kitchen. Those are fairly inexpensive, is helpful in that regard to gauge what your temperature of your water actually is. Once it hits a metal bowl, it usually cools down by about 10 degrees, so I'll keep that in mind. Next thing you want to add is about a tablespoon of yeast, and active dry yeast. We have that available on our website in our 1-year supply and our one of our kits that we have for bread making. And then you want a sugar source, and I'd recommend molasses. That keeps for a very long time, and it's full of minerals and some vitamins. Some of the minerals that it does have in large quantities is calcium and iron, magnesium, potassium, vitamin B6s, has manganese and copper and selenium. So, and there's got a whole bunch of other minerals in there and vitamins that are in smaller quantities. So it's a very healthy form of sugar. It's not, as they call, empty calories. And so 1 tablespoon of that, and then 1 teaspoon of salt. You can either use iodized salt or Himalayan salt, which is going to give you a lot more minerals in the Himalayan salt. So 1 teaspoon of that, and 2 tablespoons of ground flaxseed is another good thing to add. You don't have to add it, but it does make the bread give a little bit more flavor as well as a lot of nutrition. And so you can grind like our 1-year food supply, and I think our 6-month as well. It comes with flaxseed, and you can grind that with like our hand crank grain mill with the stainless steel burrs. So you can grind the flaxseed with that, or if you have a little electric coffee grinder or even a manual coffee grinder, works well for grinding it. It's important to grind it because your body can't use the oils and other substances inside the seed. It'll just go right through you if you don't chew it well. So it's important to grind the flaxseed. So 2 tablespoons of that. 1 tablespoon of some kind of oil, and that gives a little nicer consistency to the bread. And for long-term storage, coconut oil is a good one because it's a saturated fat. It's not going to go rancid like a unsaturated oil type would. But if you're have it available, you could use a vegetable or a corn oil or a canola or something like that. Also works well. Or even olive oil. 1 tablespoon of ground sweet pepper would be another added item. You don't have to have it, but it adds a little bit of nutrition and gives it a nice flavor as well. So that's an optional ingredient, but I usually like to put that in there. And as the flour goes, you'd want to grind up about 2.5 cups of the wheat berries, and that'll make so you need 5 1/4 cups of whole wheat flour. And so those are some of the basic ingredients that you want to put in there.
All right, Dan, now that we understand what tools we need and what the ingredients are, can you give me a step-by-step breakdown of actually making a loaf of bread?
Sure, Jim. So the first step would be to get your bowl out and add the hot water to it. Then you want to add in the molasses and the salt and your yeast. So add those all in there. Stir it up with your spoon. Get it all nicely dissolved. And then you want to let it sit for a couple minutes just to let the yeast be able to start growing and waking up. And then you can add in the rest of your ingredients. So you could add in your flaxseed if you want that in there, or in the other items. Your oil can go in, and then you start putting in your flour. So just measure it out. So five and a quarter cups seems to work pretty well for about 2 cups of water to give a good consistency. So that's the first start of the process. So once you add in all your flour, just keep stirring it until it gets pretty thick and all the ingredients are kind of mixed together. And then you want to start the kneading process. So you may want to look up some YouTube videos on kneading, since that takes a little bit of a skill to do that and to learn how to do that. So I encourage you to look around and see several different people on how they knead and try to get some ideas of how to do that. So you want to knead it for about 10 minutes or so. It needs to be fairly stretchy when you're done. Is usually how I tell. Kind of take a little piece and pull it apart a little bit, see how stretchy it is. It kind of breaks apart really easily. Then you probably need to knead it some more.
And by the way, Dan, when you're talking about kneading it, that is not, if you're going to look it up on YouTube, don't look up N-E-E-D. You're going to look up K-N-E-E-D, which is the kind of kneading that you're talking about.
That's a good comment, Jim. Thanks. Okay, so then after it's kneaded enough to be kind of, when you poke at it too, if you poke at the ball of dough and it bounces back fairly easily, then you know you're done. So you want to let it rest in the bowl for about an hour. And if you have maybe a cutting board or some kind of cloth that you want to put over there to keep the moisture in, that helps. And you just want to let it rise. So the yeast is going to be growing and expanding and putting off carbon dioxide. And so that's what creates the little bubbles in the bread to make it puffy.
Dan, do you do that in the bowl, or would you put it in the pan first?
No, you want to keep that in the bowl, and it'll rise in that bowl, same bowl you mixed it all up into. So then once you've let it rise for about an hour, you want to punch it down so seems like you're defeating the purpose, but it actually will help the yeast be able to grab onto more food, because it's creating these little bubbles where it can't reach the food anymore as easily. So once you punch it down, it'll be able to grow some more and also give you a finer texture to your bread, and you won't have big holes in your bread. And so you want to punch it down completely, and then you can go ahead and let it take it out and knead it a little bit more so it's a nice ball of dough, and then you can go ahead and shape it inside your pan. Now when you put it in your bread pan, you want to make sure you grease the inside of your pan. Spray oil is the most convenient, but if you don't have that, you could just use some oil on your hand or on a little brush and brush the inside of the pan so that it doesn't stick and tear the loaf apart when you're trying to get it out. And so just may also want to see some instructions on YouTube about shaping and how to do that, since that can be a little bit of a difficult process. But nonetheless, you want to make it into kind of a long cylindrical shape and put that into your pan with kind of the ends tucked in. And so once you have it in there, you want to set a timer for about 30 minutes. And so you're going to let it rise for 30 minutes before you start to bake it. And after about 20 minutes or so, you want to get your oven heated up to 425 degrees. You can set a little timer for that. So 20 minutes in to it's rising in the pan, get your oven heated up. And it usually heats up in about 10 minutes or so. So right about the 30-minute mark, your loaf should be nicely rounded on the top. And you can slide it in your oven carefully and cook it for 15 minutes at that temperature at 425 Fahrenheit. And then once the 15 minutes is up, you want to reduce the heat to 350 degrees Fahrenheit and bake it for another 30 minutes.
So, Dan, how do you control the temperature if you're doing this on a campfire?
You control the temperature by putting hot coals on the top.
And I'm thinking you'd use your thermometer here too.
Yeah, you might have to get like an oven thermometer and I don't think that's actually going to work because it needs to be inside temperature and you're not going to know. So you do a lot of guesswork and practice, which is why you need your, if you're going to do a Dutch oven, get it now and practice with it over a fire because it's going to take a little bit of time to learn how to do that.
Okay. So after it's cooked for, what was the last amount of time? 30 minutes?
Yep.
So after you've let it cook for 30 minutes, you pull it out of the oven or pull it off the fire. And then what?
Then you want to put it on a cooling rack. You may want to take a knife, like a butter knife, and go around the perimeter there so you make sure you don't tear the loaf when you take it out. But you kind of just dump it out with some pot holders and put it on a cooling rack and let it cool down. And wait for 10 minutes or so, and you should be able to try a slice. Though letting it sit overnight is going to give it a little bit better texture. Fresh out of the oven, it's going to be a little hard to cut as well as kind of sticky. But cutting into it a little bit right after you take it out of the oven, check to see if it's well done. If you have any doubt, if it's not nice and brown on the top and the sides, you may want to put it back in the oven right away to cook it for another 10 minutes just to make sure it's well done inside, because once it cools down, then you really can't bake it again and try to get the inside nicely baked. It's going to be too long of a process, and you're going to end up burning the outside if you try to rebake it. So try to make sure it's well baked the first time before it cools down too much.
And all that just comes from experience, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's going to take, don't expect to get a nice loaf the first time. It's going to take some practice.
Okay, so now I have one other question for you, Dan. It just seems that it would be so much easier if you stored flour instead of storing the wheat berries and then having to grind them. So why don't we just store the flour?
Well, for one reason, whole wheat flour, which actually has the wheat germ still in it, which is going to give you the most nutrition, is not going to last very long in a can. It's because the oxygen absorber is in there. It will last for a couple years, but beyond that, it's going to go rancid when you open the can, and you'll be disappointed that it won't be still in good condition. So most of the time, if you buy flour in a can for long-term storage, it's just going to be white flour. And so that is an option, but eventually even that will go rancid and not be good. So the best option is to store the whole grain. And so you get all the nutrition, plus it's going to be in the freshest condition and have the best flavor.
So how long can you store the whole grain?
Well, pretty much indefinitely. It'll store for, usually rated at about 30 plus years. But it'll go much longer than that most of the time, unless it's in a very hot, humid environment exposed to the air. But inside of a can, it'll last almost indefinitely. Yes, actually, they found wheat in some of the pyramids in Egypt. When, in fact, one of them was King Tut's tomb. You may have recognized that name. And they were able to sprout that grain and reproduce it. They grew it out and produced a variety that you can actually buy today. Now, one thing to note here, just if you want to think about growing the wheat berries after they've been in long-term storage, such as with an oxygen absorber in them, one of the reasons why they were sproutable out of the tomb is that they still had air that they were exposed to. And since the wheat berries are actually alive, in a sense, dormant, but still alive, if you cut out the oxygen entirely, they will die and they won't be sproutable. So
you could remove the oxygen absorbers from them and store them that way indefinitely?
Yeah, I mean, it can store right in a bucket or something with air in them can, so they allow them to be sproutable.
Wow, that's interesting. I had no idea that wheat berries would last that long, but that makes a lot of sense, and it certainly makes more sense than storing the flour. Okay, that's very interesting, Dan. Now, just tell me, you mentioned that we sell the grinders and the Dutch ovens on our website. Do we have any kind of kit that we can offer on Food Storage Guys that will help people make bread?
Yeah, Jim, we have a nice bread making kit. You can find it under our food storage main menu and under miscellaneous supplies underneath that. and bread making kit underneath that. So it is a real nice kit that gives you the grain in buckets, so a good supply, and it gives you some yeast, the grain mill, and also a nice book on the art of bread making with natural yeast. So it gives a lot of good recipes and tips. Yeah, I'll finish about the book here. So yeah, we have this bread making kit, and it has and it has 2 buckets of nice grain. I don't want to say that. So we have this nice bread making kit that has 2 buckets of grain, some yeast, the grain mill, and a book on bread making with natural yeast that has some good recipes in there and instructions.
So tell me more about the natural yeast.
Sure, Jim. So natural yeast is something that is naturally floating around the air, little yeast spores, things like that. So if you set out some flour and water mixture out in the open air, that yeast will start attaching to it and growing in it. And there's some specific instructions in the book that we have on our website called The Art of Bread Making with Natural Yeast. So I highly recommend, if you're interested in that, to go check that out.
Okay, did you say that kit comes with yeast too, though, or not?
Yeah, it does.
All right, that's all I have, Dan. This has been a really interesting discussion. I've learned a lot listening to you. I can't wait to give it a try and make a loaf of bread myself, Dan. I'll let you know how it goes, and let's talk again next week.
Yeah, it sounds great, Jim. Just don't forget to keep trying and don't give up. Takes a little practice, but that's one of the things that's important to do to prepare for a future, is to practice your skills now and not wait till you need them.
Well, even if it's a failure, Dan, I enjoy bread well enough that I can probably eat a couple failures as well.
Yep, I've eaten many myself.
Well, Dan, this one was really interesting, and I'm really happy to have heard you describe how to make a loaf of bread. I certainly will be giving it a try and see how mine comes out. But I'm thinking next week maybe we can talk about wood-burning stoves, how to buy them, how to use them, and all the other details that may be relevant to people that need to get an alternative heat source in their homes.
Yeah, it sounds great, Jim. I look forward to that.
All right. See you next time, Dan.
Okay, you too, Jim. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Head on over to foodstorageguys.com to see all of our options to help you prepare for an uncertain future. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and click the thumbs up on this video if you like this show. If you have any questions or comments about this topic, please leave them in the comments below. And if you thought this information was helpful, be sure to share this show with your friends and family.